do it is better. Otherwise, I'd have to transfer it to you.
So let's bow in, everyone. And welcome to the course, The Buddhist Path of Awakening. We are working our way through the book Shambhala, The Sacred Path of the Warrior by Chogyam Trungpa. Tonight we're covering chapters 15, Overcoming Habitual Patterns, and 16, which I think is called Sacred World. I've got it in front of me. Yes. So we're going to start. Michael, take it away.
So, welcome. Good morning, as Trungpa Rinpoche used to say to everyone. The chapter that I'm going to be talking about, Overcoming Habitual Patterns, is a fairly short and direct chapter. I have to say that in general, the Shambhala teachings are quite direct. It begins by saying that arrogance, which we talked about in the previous chapter, arrogance comes from lack of gentleness, and lack of gentleness comes from relying on habitual patterns. So these are two significant obstacles to our ability to recognize our basic goodness, our ability to invoke drala, our ability to wake up right on the spot. And in particular, lack of gentleness relates to our difficulty in general accepting and relating to things, for that matter, accepting and relating to ourselves as we are, rather than trying to make things different or wishing things would be different, which inevitably brings some kind of attempt to control, change, or aggress. So gentleness is an important aspect of the Shambhala teachings. And of course, we develop our capacity for gentleness through the practice of meditation, where we begin first by just letting ourselves be as we are, facing ourselves as we are, and trying not to change our experience, but just simply be in our experience, which in itself is a change from our normal habitual patterns. In any case, Trungpa Rinpoche says that by clinging to habitual patterns, we're cutting ourselves off from the warrior's world. So I just wanted to say a few things before we launch into the chapter as a whole. First of all, I think that one of the things that we're being taught in this chapter is how to recognize habitual patterns. He gives us some information that helps us recognize our experience of habitual patterns. And he helps us also understand why these are problematic. Much in the same way as we're taught in the beginning of this book how to recognize our basic goodness. We also want to know how to recognize the obstacles to basic goodness. We want to know, in other words, what to accept and what to reject, or what to adopt and what to reject. And there are many layers to habitual patterns, from obvious behaviors to more subtle ways that our perceptions and beliefs are shaped by habitual patterns, and the subtle ways that we project those patterns onto ourselves and onto the world around us. And in fact, we even have habitual patterns for how we relate to habitual patterns. For instance, we often regard our habitual patterns with self-aggression and self-criticism, which is a habitual pattern in itself. We often approach our habitual patterns from the habitual pattern of a belief in ego, and so subtly or not so subtly engage with or try to work with our habitual patterns from the point of view of trying to develop a better ego rather than truly letting go. And some of our attempts to change our habitual patterns can be quite helpful, but it's important to understand how habitual patterns can be an obstacle. And in particular, for that matter, the habitual pattern of conceptual mind, our conceptual mind, which tends to see things in either or terms, so that we feel we're either a success or a failure, and have difficulty accepting the nature of path in how we work with ourselves and how we work with situations. And again, our path really involves the practice of meditation. And through meditation practice, we develop our inherent capacity to wake up, to be aware. As Trungpa Rinpoche said in The Path of Individual Liberation, the Hinayana text we read, the attitude that brings about the possibility of mindfulness is mind's awareness of itself. Your mind is aware of itself, which means that you're aware that you're aware. And as we develop this self-awareness, what happens is, both in meditation practice, but also in post-meditation practice, perhaps more significantly in post-meditation practice, we become more aware of what we're experiencing, what we're feeling, what we're thinking. I've experienced this myself. I know from discussion group and from talking to people that the people describe this in different ways. They're able to recognize they're becoming angry. They're able to recognize that some kind of depression or some kind of self-critical attitude is developing. And just in the recognition alone, we're able to let go. So that developing awareness, developing our ability to be aware of our mind is quite an important part of letting go of habitual patterns. In any case, to return to the chapter as a whole, describing habitual patterns, Trungpa Rinpoche says they're like reflexes, that when we're shocked, we panic, and when we're attacked, we become defensive. They're very quick, like a finger snap, and we react based on habitual patterns, based on what we've experienced in the past, and therefore how we bring the past into the present, or how our experience of the past shapes our present, shapes what we believe, what we perceive. So, and he says on a more subtle level, we use habitual patterns to hide our self-consciousness. When we feel inadequate, we employ habitual responses to patch our self-image. We invent excuses to hide our inadequacies from people. And he goes on to describe different kinds of experiences we might have that, as he says, are often reflections of habitual patterns. These include our standard emotional responses, or familiar habitual emotional responses, mental fatigue, restlessness, irritation over something we don't like, and many of our desires. And says all of these are often, not necessarily always, but often reflections of our habitual patterns. And most importantly, what happens is we use these habitual patterns to seal ourselves off and to build ourselves up. So again, we're talking about, as we have in discussing previous chapters, our tendency to hide in a cocoon of habitual patterns, habitual behaviors, to cut ourselves off from the world, cut ourselves off from other people in a self-defensive way. He describes a Japanese term, toranoko, which he says means tiger cub. And with this, says that the tiger cub, the toranoko, refers to someone who appears brave, but is actually a coward. And that is the description of clinging to habitual patterns. So again, what we're talking about here is quite similar to what we talked about in the previous chapter about fear and fearlessness. And that, a part of our training, a part of our working with ourselves is learning to be with our fear, to look at our fear, and recognize the sad and tender heart that's often underneath our fear. And that fearlessness, again, doesn't mean an absence of fear, but it means going beyond fear. So this is a theme that comes up again and again in the Shambhala teachings. He says the Tibetan word for animal, going from tiger cubs to animal, is tudro, which means hunched over, hunched walking. And with this, pretty clearly makes a connection with this notion of tudro, or animal, with the animal realm altogether. So the animal realm is one of the 6 realms of existence in Buddhist psychology, and it's characterized primarily by ignorance. That's not to say that animals can't be aggressive and passionate as well, just as any being can, but that primarily the animal realm is marked by ignorance. Animals tend, as he says, animals tend to rely primarily on instinct and follow the same kinds of patterns of behavior relating to the world, even perceiving the world in a really limited way in general. And he says that's the description of clinging to habitual patterns. There's limited awareness, limited vision, limited creativity, and limited inquisitiveness. He says with Tudro that these animals, that their most sensitive sense organs are their nostrils, which they use to smell their way through the world. And that's a precise description of habitual behavior, which is a manifestation of animal instinct. Habitual patterns allow you to look no further than 3 steps ahead of you. You never look up at the bright sky, and that there's no possibility of head and shoulders has ever occurred in that realm. So again, we're talking about an existence that's really closed down, hunched over, sealed in, cocoon, characterized again by ignorance as a way of relating to the world and relating to oneself. He says, even if you had been instructed in how to experience head and shoulders and how to raise yourself up to see the great eastern sun, if you don't overcome habitual patterns, you remain a Tudro. You remain sealed in this existence of ignorance and dullness, lack of creativity, lack of awareness. And he goes on to say, when a Tudro type person meets a warrior, they might feel the warrior has a very tedious existence. How can the warrior be so upright and awake? And that they might even feel sorry for the warrior who has to stand on 2 feet and maintain head and shoulders. It was interesting to read. I had to think about that because perhaps other people have had the experience sometimes of having someone ask about meditation practice or what it is that happens in meditation. And their reaction is, that sounds boring. That sounds so hard. I couldn't do that. I couldn't. So, and they see it as if it was something negative that's imposed, whereas in my experience, at least, it's anything but that. In any case, it goes on to say that the Tudro person might even offer the warrior a chair. Then the warrior wouldn't have to maintain head and shoulders. He could at least slouch and put his feet on the coffee table. And of course, as I read that line, my feet were on the coffee table, so I took a better posture. That was just my experience of that. In any case, he says a warrior never needs time off. And that's the thing. I think people, even and ourselves, when we're living in a Tudro type existence, we think we need time off, and we take time off, or we find ourselves mindlessly taking time off. And he says that with that, if we relax by slouching or indulging in habitual patterns, this can produce a kind of schizophrenia. And he describes the type of situation where a person is a nice boss and very gregarious in the office, but then comes home quite irritable. He turn on the television, even beats his wife, sends his children to their room, telling them he needs peace and quiet. So that there's a real schizophrenia or a real I'm trying to think of the right word, dichotomy in one's life. So and as he says, one wonders what kind of peace and quiet such a person is really looking for. It seems rather that he's looking for pain in a hellish life. So this is why ultimately freeing ourselves from habitual patterns becomes so important. In some ways, in thinking about this chapter, I was reminded of some of the things we read about in the Path of Individual Liberation, where Trungpa Rinpoche talked about how very small flickers of thought blow up into very big dramas and very big situations, and that's what engaging or indulging, I should say, in our habitual patterns can lead to, if we're not able to, relate fully with some awareness to situations. And he says the process of freeing ourselves from arrogance and cutting off habitual patterns is a very drastic measure, but it's necessary in order to help others. We should take pride in ourselves and uplift ourselves and regard ourselves as honest and genuine warriors. And he goes on to reiterate, habitual patterns are dangerous and destructive. They prevent us from seeing the great eastern sun. When habitual patterns constantly operate, we can't raise up our head and shoulders at all. We're down there, looking for this and that. Again, this hunched over, Tudro, animal-like existence. We've forgotten about uplifted and open vision. And as he says with this, we begin to dissolve ourselves and involve ourselves in a subhuman or even sub-animal realm. And then he goes on to say, when we were very young, like 3 years old, we didn't want to escape reality. We didn't want to escape reality, particularly because we were so interested in how things were done. We asked our mother and father all sorts of questions, But then he says that innocent inquisitiveness has been forgotten. Therefore, we have to reignite it, which is what we do through our practice, through our contemplation, through our study, and through looking at ourselves. And basically, another point that I think is made here about with this inquisitiveness of the young child is that basically ignorance is not inherent in us. Ignorance seems to be something that we get caught up in later on, but that our initial experience is one of openness and inquisitiveness. As he says, when we were very young, 3 years old, we didn't want to escape reality, which is what we are doing when we engage in the cocoon, when we engage in this hunched over way of relating to ourselves and relating to the world. He says entering the cocoon of two-drove behavior happens after that initial inquisitiveness. He says once there was tremendous inquisitiveness, but then we thought we were mistreated by the world. So we jumped into our cocoon and decided to sleep. And then he goes on to say, uplifting our head and shoulders may sometimes give us back pains. In other words, there are times when it may not be easy to practice. It may not be easy to work with ourselves in a genuine and straightforward way. But he says extending ourselves and uplifting ourselves is necessary. We're talking about how we can actually become decent human beings without trying to entertain ourselves from here to the next corner. The constant search for entertainment, for immediate entertainment, is a big problem. And that's because often our search for entertainment is really almost like we're looking for an anesthetic, some way of, again, deadening ourselves, shutting down, closing down, hunching over. So he says, we just ask ourselves, what can I do next? How can I save myself from boredom? That's giving in to that. He says the journey we're making is demanding, but there's no way of avoiding it. But when we are able to stop habitual patterns, we can appreciate the real world on the spot. We can appreciate the bright, beautiful, fantastic world around us. He says we don't have to feel resentful or embarrassed. Once we overcome habitual patterns, the vividness of the Drala principle, the magic will descend and we'll begin to become masters of our world. So I think in this chapter, he gives us a very good sense of what it is we're working with habitual patterns, some ways that we can come to recognize habitual patterns when they arise, and why it's so important to recognize and work with them, and instead tune into, recognize our basic goodness and wake up to the world around us. So with that, I'll turn it over to John.
Thank you, Michael. That was terrific. In reading that, I know I've quoted this before, and I'm not going to quote it again, but I'll just refer you to Wordsworth's poem, Intimations of Immortality on Reflections of Early Childhood, which is all about how in early childhood our eyes are much more open. We're less clouded by habitual pattern. And how as we grow older, habitual pattern, which is just the habitual constant thoughts that cloud our mind, and we can't see as clearly because we have this fog of thought. Although there are moments when the fog clears and we might be startled or awakened by the beauty and vividness and power of the world as it presents, absent that fog of thought, that fog of habitual pattern. And so he starts this next chapter, Sacred World, by saying that arrogance, recapping, arrogance and habitual patterns are obstacles to experiencing Drala. Drala is this vivid world. It's the world of this vividness that we can experience, that we can live in, where the world is beautiful, moving, meaningful, constantly. But arrogance, which is the constant self-reference that I'm so important, and habitual pattern, which is the way in which arrogance expresses itself, as well as all of our other neurotic patterns. And these cloud over this beautiful world. It's like though we're seeing it through a fog, through sunglasses, or however you want to put it. So he says, in order to discover magic in the world, and this magic is an inherent quality of the real world, we have to overcome the individual neurosis and self-centered attitudes that prevent us from experiencing greater vision beyond ourselves. By obscuring our vision, these self-centered attitudes and neurotic patterns also prevent us from uplifting ourselves so that we can extend ourselves to help others, because we're so self-involved. It's really interesting. I mean, I know we so many people here, not so many, but quite a few, are recovering alcoholics. And I've been reading the big book, and especially the stories at the end. And it's so much about how as people regain their sanity, an important part of that is their ability and their involvement in helping others, because it opens their hearts, it opens everybody's hearts, and it opens us to the world. He says, according to the Shambhala teachings, we have to recognize that our individual experience of sanity is inherently linked to our vision for a good human society. These two go together. In order to have a good human society, we have to become sane and good humans. He says, if we try to solve society's problems without overcoming the confusion and aggression in our own state of mind, then our efforts will only contribute to the basic problems instead of solving them. We'll just amplify those problems. We'll just complicate them. That is why the individual journey or warriorship must be undertaken before we can address the larger issues of how to help this world. So we have to contact that sanity. He talks about it in the past chapter that we actually experienced it as children to a greater degree because our minds haven't been clouded yet with habitual patterns to the extent that they are as we grow old. He says the point of warriorship is to become a gentle and tamed human being who can make a genuine contribution to this world. Gentle and tamed. When we practice our meditation, we are constantly coming back to awareness of whatever. It doesn't matter if it's awareness of what's going on in me, awareness of what's going on out there. And we are developing a gentleness. One of the first ways of developing compassion is to develop it for oneself. What does that mean? That means seeing oneself without self-criticism, just seeing it with clarity, intelligence, with ease, being kind to oneself. And so this is the beginning of developing the gentleness of the warrior. And having developed this kind of gentleness for oneself through the practice of meditation and self-awareness, of not constantly being lost in dreams, but of being aware and of letting it be, then we can begin to extend that kind of gentleness to others and make a contribution to the world. He says the warrior's journey is based on discovering what is intrinsically good about human existence and how to share that basic nature of goodness with others. He says, then he goes on, that as we develop this, then there is a natural order and harmony to this world which we can discover. We have to feel it in our bones, in our hearts, in our minds. And this is a discovery. If we are thoroughly trained in the disciplines of warriorship, then by invoking the Drala principle, the Drala, again, it's the magic of this natural world as it arises now, seen without arrogance and without the fog of constant thoughts about me and mine. By invoking this principle, we can awaken the intimate connection to reality That provides the ground to work with others in a genuine and gentle fashion. Genuine, stripped of all these preconceptions, false ideas, and gentle, compassionate. Compassion to oneself, compassion to others. They go together completely. He says, when you invoke Drala, that's this magic of the world, then you begin to experience the basic goodness, that this world and oneself is fundamentally good, worth being here for, wholesome, reflected everywhere in yourself, in others, and in the entire world. You still see the setting sun degraded existence, but you also see that life can be upgraded, that there is the potential for sacredness in every situation. The sacredness is seeing things as they are. What is? That's what the sacredness is. It's not some kind of holy add-on, like we're going to bless everything or something. Things are naturally sacred because they are what they are so beautifully. This sacredness exists naturally, spontaneously in the phenomenal world. It's here all the time. He says, phenomenal existence, this is what it's about. Sights, sounds, smells, tastes, bodily sensations, and mental events. These are the phenomena. Nangwa in Tibetan, they're called. In spite of being filled with confusion and problems, this phenomenal existence is constantly influenced by the vision of the great Eastern Sun. Sacred world is great because of its primordial quality. That means we constantly think of going from point A to point B. Meanwhile, there is no point A or point B. Ultimately, we're in the middle of it, as that song goes, the universe song, an ever-expanding universe. No limit. It's just endless. And this is what the space that we inhabit is, this cosmic mirror, as it's sometimes called, is this limitless space. He says, so the world is great Eastern Sun we're going through is because of its primordial quality. It goes back to before history, before mind, vast and primordial wisdom. Before mind is here all the time. It's right now. Mind thinks, oh, I want to do this, or I like that, or I don't like the other. And then it's gone, and we're in this cosmic mirror of continual, uninterrupted awareness. Awareness of what? Whatever happens to be arising in the mirror, and we are in the mirror. In fact, there is no we. It's just this constant display of phenomena, like things appearing in a mirror. Old and young at the same time, never tarnished or diminished by the relative problems of the world. All of this that's arising. It's east because there are always possibilities of vision in this world. East is where the sun rises. East is the constant new, the constant arising of whatever is new. That's why it's the great Eastern Sun. It represents the dawn of wakefulness, he says, the horizon of human consciousness, where vision is constantly arising. You are always looking east, wherever you are. When you set up a shrine like this, in by me, it's constantly, as you sit at that shrine, you are looking east. Whatever direction you're looking in, it's east. You always have the possibilities of wakeful vision. Even in the most degraded and confused situations, you can wake up. Whatever, always. Finally, sacred world is lighted by the sun, which is the principle of never-ending brilliance and radiance, that all of this is arising so brilliantly and radiantly, instant by instant. It's connected, the sun, with seeing self-existing possibilities of virtue and richness in the world. The great Eastern Sun is eternally blazing, It has no need of fuel. Here it is. There actually is greater luminosity that occurs without fuel, even without a pilot light, he says. Seeing the sacred world is witnessing that greater vision, which is there all the time. It's always here, just waiting for us. And we're going to really, what he's presenting here is how to connect to it more and more as we go further and further into these teachings. The experience of sacred world begins to show you how you are woven together with the richness and brilliance of this phenomenal world. We are intimately interconnected with it, but we get lost in the I. I worry, I think, I am depressed, I hope, I fear, I wish, I want. And we get lost with this interconnectedness that is the very nature of our existence, of existence altogether. He says, you begin to see the possibilities of natural hierarchy or natural order, which could provide the model for how to conduct your life. And I have to confess, when I first heard this teaching of natural hierarchy, I found it, that it offended my democratic sense, my sense of democracy, that all men and women are created equal. But in fact, there is a natural order that is constantly presenting itself, constantly changing, constantly evolving as different events take place. And we begin to see this possibility of natural hierarchy and of fitting ourselves into it, or natural order, which could provide the model for how to conduct your life. He says the warrior discovering natural hierarchy is not seeing a repressive ladder structure, like, here's the president of the United States and I'm just this lowly little citizen, or whatever it might be. But rather it is seeing the great eastern sun reflected everywhere, in everything. You see possibilities of order in the world that are not based on struggle and aggression. That's the key, that this order of this natural hierarchy is not based on struggle and aggression. It's natural. It's an interworking of everything that comes together like this, and it's constantly changing. So the understanding of hierarchy manifests as a sense of natural decorum, how we behave properly in this world, respectfully, with appreciation for the phenomenal world. He says, because you experience dignity and elegance that do not have to be cultivated. Dignity and elegance. Dignity means that things are worthwhile. They have natural worth. And elegance in that there's this extraordinary beauty in the world. It is constantly expressing itself moment by moment. The warrior's decorum is this naturalness, togetherness, and calm, which comes from a feeling of being in harmony with yourself and with the environment. So what begins to happen is that as we begin to become more sane, as we begin to develop compassion for ourselves and clarity of vision beyond the habitual patterns which distort our vision, these ideas, as we begin to see past them, we begin to feel a natural harmony with this world, which is quite beautiful, with yourself and the environment. He says situations fit naturally. So what happens is that you can abandon the final vestiges of the giant backpack of habitual patterns of me, of me and my worry, my past, my future, my present. You can abandon this giant backpack that you've been carrying for so long to protect yourself from nature, he says. You see that you do not need your bag of ego-centered tricks, which is so painful, so repressive. You realize that you can live with nature as it is and as you are. You feel at home in the world, and nature includes human society. That's part of nature. It's not just the natural world of trees and rocks and clouds. So the invocation of the Drala principle means that we can live in harmony with the elemental quality of reality, rather than the modern approach of trying to conquer it. And don't we try to conquer reality, build dams, hydroelectric plants, nuclear fission, to trying to control the weather, agriculture, everything. The warrior's approach is that rather than trying to overcome the raw elements of existence, one should respect their power and their order as a guide to human conduct. And now he gets into the ancient philosophies of China and Japan. Before I came to met Trungpa Rinpoche, I was a scholar of Chinese history, so I've got some familiarity with all this. I was my undergraduate major, and then I did graduate work in it as well. I was interrupted by the Vietnam War, so I couldn't continue it, and I tried to go back to it, but didn't. But anyhow, I studied Chinese history, which is what he's going to be talking about here, the ancient philosophies. He's talking about heaven, earth, and man. This is a Confucian idea that goes back, hard to say, probably at least to 1000 AD, maybe before. The earliest dynasties in China go back 2000 years and more, the Xia and the Shang dynasties. And there are elements of Confucianism and Confucian philosophy that are discovered from 2000 AD. The only historical documents, there were no writing on paper in those days, but just might interest you, the Chinese had an art of what was called scapulomancy. It was a way of divining the future. And what they did was they took the scapula, the shoulder blades of oxen, and who had died or killed or whatever. And then they took those and they carved questions on them. And they then threw those bones into the fire. And according to how they cracked, that was how they told the future. These are called scapulomancy bones. And they're the earliest examples of Chinese writing. And in them, there are these Confucian ideas of heaven, earth, and man. And what heaven is, in Tibetan, you see, what happened was that Buddhism came to Tibet from two places, from India and also from China. It had gone to China around the time of Christ, but it began to come to Tibet in about the 6th century from both India and China. And it was Chan Buddhism, which eventually went to Japan and became Zen, that came to Tibet. And it brought with it, so for instance, if you look at a tanka, that's a painting like the one behind me over my shoulder here. But if you look at a tanka of the symbol of the Kala Chakra Tantra, which is the earliest tantra taught by the Buddha, it was given to King Indrabhuti in southern India. And if you look at the tanka, it's full of Chinese hexagrams. It's the Chinese influence. The Chinese had a big influence on Tibet. In fact, in the 8th century, when Buddhism was just arriving in Tibet, almost 750 years after it had already gone to China, it was coming back from China to Tibet, and also coming from India to Tibet. Padmasambhava arrived then at the same time. And the Chinese had a tremendous influence. There was a thing that happened in Lhasa called the Great Debate in, I think it was around 760. And King Trisong Detsen, who was the king of China, sort of oversaw this. And it was an argument between the Hoshang Mahayana, who was the Chinese patriarch in Lhasa, and Shantarakshita was the Indian debater. And they were arguing about whether it was a gradual path to enlightenment, the Indian approach, or a sudden path to enlightenment, the Chinese approach. And the Indians won, but the Chinese influence never left. And another way it stayed in China was in this idea of heaven, earth, and man. In Confucianism, dating back to at least 1000 AD, probably 2000 AD, there's this notion that the heaven is the source of inspiration, lofty ideals, the rule of law, the experience of reality. He says the grandeur and vision of heaven inspire human greatness and creativity. You may think of heaven as dry and conceptual, he says, but warmth and love come from it too. It is the source of the rain that falls on the earth. This idea of heaven is sort of the ordering principle of life. Earth, this is Chinese Confucianism, that was adopted by the Tibetans, symbolizes practicality and receptivity. It's the ground. It is the ground that supports and promotes life. It may seem solid and stubborn, but it can be penetrated and worked on, cultivated. Its proper relationship with heaven is what makes earth pliable. The rain falls and the earth is softened and things grow. The earth yields, becomes gentle, soft, and pliable so that greenery can grow on it and man can cultivate and prosper on it. Man is the link between the two. Man is connected with the simplicity of living in harmony with heaven and earth. The freedom and inspiration of heaven and the practicality and groundedness of earth can produce good human society. However, they can fall out of sync. It's the emperor's job, the king, to bring heaven and earth and man together. Heaven up here, earth down here, and man in the middle. This is the character for the king. The horizontal line on top represents heaven, the one on the bottom is earth, and the one in the middle is man, and they are joined vertically. Here's a more stylized version of the same thing. The word in Chinese is Wang, and it means the king, the ruler, because it's the ruler's job to unite heaven, earth, and man, to bring them into harmony. When this is done, there is good human society, the inspiration of heaven, the groundedness, the richness of earth, and the creativity and openness, gentleness, kindness of man. When these three are in union, like that character, then there is good human society. When they are not, when they fall out of connection, things go bad. Examples of this are always given. Chinese history from the Shang dynasty on is a history of different dynasties that took power. Usually there were native Chinese dynasties, and then there were invading so-called barbarian dynasties. The word for barbarian in Chinese is yet, and there were all kinds of barbarians who came in to China, the last being the Manchus, who came in around 1655, I think, and established what was called the Qing dynasty. When that dynasty began to go bad, it went bad in a big way. In the 19th century, there was a huge rebellion, religiously inspired, called the Taiping Rebellion. It lasted for almost 15 years. And during the time of the Taiping Rebellion, upwards, supposedly, of 20 million people died in the wars. The Qing dynasty, which was the Manchu dynasty, the so-called barbarian dynasty, brought in Westerners. They brought in General Chinese Gordon, who was a British adventurer who eventually died at Khartoum. And he organized the the Qing dynasty, Manchu dynasty response to the Taipings. And eventually that rebellion was put down. 20 million people died. And at the same time, there's a constant history in China of the Yellow River. It's the river that runs through the northern area of China. It's the 6th largest river and the longest river in the world. And the thing about the Yellow River is that it carries huge amounts of silt as it goes. This silt lies, falls to the bottom of the river, and eventually the river floods. So over the course of centuries, the Chinese have built huge dikes to contain the Yellow River, to keep it from flooding. But eventually, sooner or later, those dikes break and the river floods. And just after the Taiping Rebellion was put down, the Yellow River flooded. And the mouth of the Yellow River, which went to the north of the Shandong Peninsula, moved to the south. That's a distance of 700 miles. You can imagine the whole river shifting its course. This is the breadbasket of China. This is where all the grain is grown. There was massive starvation and suffering. This is an example of the emperor losing what was called the mandate of heaven. That means that they were acting improperly. They weren't doing what is necessary to join heaven, earth, and man. What is necessary, besides being a good and just ruler, which is the main thing? There is a thing, everybody knows about the I Ching, which is actually pronounced the I Jing. There were 12 Jings. Jings are what were called the classics, usually translated as classic. They were volumes, and there were 12 different ones. The I Ching was the book of changes, which everybody knows about. You use it to tell, you throw the coins, you tell the future. But there were 11 others. And one of the ones that was most important was called the Li Jing. Li means ritual. And it had to do with what the emperor was supposed to do to perform ritual ceremonies and how to behave properly to join heaven, earth, and man, to prevent things like the Taiping Rebellion, like the Great Flood of the Yellow River in the late 1800s, and the spread of enormous disease and famine in China at that time, which culminated in a greater cataclysm yet when Sun Yat-sen overthrew the last dynasty in 1911 or 12 and established the Republic of China, which then ushered in a period of incredible warfare. China was divided into warring states that were fighting among themselves, which went on from about 1912 until one of them, the Chinese communists, eventually emerged victorious, consolidated control. That was in 1949. And during that time, the Japanese invaded China during the Second World War and established their own hegemony. So, my gosh, what a period of cataclysm. And this is a period in which the mandate of heaven had been lost. Heaven, earth, and man were not being joined. And enormous confusion, suffering, and cataclysm devolved. He says, when human beings live in harmony with the principles of heaven, earth, and man, heaven is the inspiration, law, values, true values. Earth is groundedness. It's reality. It's being in touch with nature. And man is the joining principle that brings those two together. When they're in harmony, he says, then the four seasons and the elements of the world will also begin to work together harmoniously. Then there is no fear, and human beings begin to join in as they deserve, living in this world. They begin to appreciate all this. But if human beings violate their connection or lose their trust in heaven and earth, then there will be social chaos and natural disasters, and boy, were there. From the Taiping Rebellion through the Chinese communist takeover of China. And you could argue that that's a continuation of the chaos. Trungpa Rinpoche felt that the Chinese, that Mao in particular, was incredibly evil. He was a Rudra. I've talked about this before, that he was an example of incredible ego. And you can have ego, Rudra, not just in an individual, but a whole country can become a massive Rudra. And I think he felt that that's what China had become, at least for a while or in part. Okay. He said, and then we could consider the situation in the world today. Incredible overpopulation. Our population has increased 400% since 1918. In 1918, it was 1.75 billion. Today, we're approaching 8. Climate change, both the ozone layers, holes in it, tremendous threat to human and all life on Earth. Loss of biodiversity, the speed with which species of life on this planet are disappearing is phenomenal. And then wars and other conflicts, the latest being Ukraine. But it just goes on and on. He says, when human beings lose their connection to nature, to heaven and earth, then they do not know how to nurture their environment or how to rule their world, which is the same thing, saying the same thing. Not being able to nurture your environment, you don't know how to rule your world. We destroy our ecology at the same time that we destroy one another. And I think we're in terrible danger of that right now, although we could argue this. So healing our society goes hand in hand with healing our personal elemental connection with the phenomenal world. It goes hand in hand with healing our own personal sanity, as well as our own connection with this beautiful phenomenal world, which is all it has to do with discovering Drala, discovering sacred world. The challenge of warriorship is to live fully in the world as it is, and to find within this world, with all its paradoxes, the essence of nowness. If we open our minds, if we open our hearts, we will find that this world is a magical place because it can be so vividly and brilliantly. But for this to occur, we have to have the bravery to proclaim the goodness and dignity of human life, which is the great Eastern Sun, without either hesitation or arrogance. Then magic or Drala can descend onto our existence. And this is all about what Trungpa Rinpoche was about, as you are going to find. He says, the world is filled with power and wisdom, which we can have, so to speak. In some sense, we have them already. We just don't realize and live by these principles of power and wisdom. But by invoking the Drala principle, we have the possibilities of experiencing sacred world, a world which has self-existing richness and brilliance, and beyond that, possibilities of natural hierarchy, natural order. That order includes all aspects of life, including those that are ugly, bitter, and sad. But even those qualities can be woven into our being. In fact, we are woven already into that fabric, whether we like it or not. We can stop complaining about and fighting with this world. Instead, we can begin to celebrate and promote the sacredness of the world. By following the way of the warrior, it is possible to expand our vision and give fearlessly to others. In that way, we have the possibilities of affecting fundamental change. We cannot change the way the world is, but by opening ourselves to the world as it is, we may find that gentleness, decency, and bravery are available, not only to us, but to all human beings. And this is the Shambhala vision. This is the vision of sacred world, which we're going to be talking about next week and in succeeding weeks. The vision for great human society and a beautiful world and sanity. So that's all I have to say about this chapter. Really magical, holy, beautiful. We can have a discussion. Oh, Steve.
Thank you for that. Could you expand on natural hierarchy? I'm not sure I really understand what they're talking about there.
We're going to get to that, but Trungpa Rinpoche, his title in Shambhala world was the Dorje Drodel. It's king, basically. And he lived in the court, which is the symbolic representation of the center of Shambhala. That's what he called his house, the court. And there was a lot of ritual and beauty and art connected with it. And he felt that It was our job to tune in to what is natural hierarchy, that is, each of us has a place and a function and a way to live our lives meaningfully with gentleness and being of help and service to others, as well as to ourselves. This is the idea that we're going to be coming to in the next chapter or two, natural hierarchy, that there is a natural hierarchy in this world. And it's natural. It's not repressive. It's not a ladder.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you for that question. Michael, do you have anything to add to that? Natural hierarchy. Wow, what a subject.
I think well, what you said, but also I think it relates to what he talked about in the chapter of developing a connection with the natural order of the world. And just that, I think. So it's not a hierarchy, and it's hierarchy in the sense of how things work, how things are organized, how things flow. And we're either, more of a Taoist idea, I think, but we're either attune ourselves to that or we end up fighting it. And that doesn't work out real well for us. So it's a sense of coming to appreciate the natural order of the world as well. Philip?
So yes, Michael and John, thanks for your talks tonight and for all of your teachings over these years. I love these chapters. I'm perhaps seeing what I want to see, but it's more than that, I think. And I think everything that we've learned comes down to these pages. It's just a matter of different words and different metaphors, but habitual patterns, that's nothing more than the opposite of mindfulness and awareness. And arrogance is nothing more than ego itself. And if we can move beyond those problems, we get to the next chapter here called Sacred World. It's a beautiful phrase. It's emptiness, it's ultimate reality. It's what the world is. So there are all these different words for it. It's all the same idea. And it's such a beautiful thing. And it seems so unattainable. And what I want to say is that my prayer for every one of you is that you can stick with the practice and with the study long enough to convince yourself in your heart of hearts that exists, that it exists beyond the level of concept, that it exists in a way that's as meaningful as meaning can be. Remember in The Wizard of Oz, there's one scene where the little dog Toto grabs the curtain and pulls it back and reveals the wizard to Dorothy. Once that happened, she could never go back to that original view, that view of what Buddhists call conventional reality. I mean, we all live there and we always will. And, most of the time it works mostly for most people. But it's not the ultimate truth. It's not the way things are. And if you just once experience the way things are, it'll forever change your approach, your belief in the world as we see it. You won't believe in the mirror anymore. Not in terms of the cosmic mirror, but in terms of the reflection. You won't believe that things have an intrinsic existence. You won't believe that a mirage is a real thing. Although you'll continue to live in that all of the time. What I guess I'm trying to say is, you don't have to think that you'll have to go through this for infinite lifetimes until you obtain Buddhahood to get there. Just stick with it, just stick with it, the study and the practice, and there will be a moment. There will be a moment that will change the way you see everything. And you will know from that point forward that what you are seeing, what you are worrying about, what seems so awful is in fact not the way things really are. And all of these words that we've been hearing about luminosity and beauty that seem so, aspirational and unattainable, they are really pragmatic, They're really here. So I really like these chapters. I will say that when I started with the Shambhala books years ago, I was put off by the language. I really had put a lot of time into Buddhism, and I was really married to the Buddhist concepts. And I thought to myself, why do we have to call bodhicitta basic goodness? Call a spade a spade. But I've come to understand that you can reach more people by using different languages, by using different metaphors. Some things work for some people, but better than other things work for them. But once again, I find myself thinking, it's all the same thing, and it gets you to the same place. And so my prayer for each of you is to stick with it.
Thank you. Kurt?
Yeah, my question is going to come around to what you spoke about, working with habitual patterns. And I had an experience yesterday, and I can put reasons behind it, but my my habitual pattern was to go into a place of sadness. And it's quite interesting to be in a state of awareness around it, watching it happen. And there was a event after event that were happening, and they all were bringing up sadness for me, or my reaction to each event was sadness. And it was so interesting to just to watch it manifest over and over again. And by the end of the day, I was sitting with a lot of sadness, but I didn't want to change it, because there was something that felt very fresh about being aware of it, having watched it, experiencing sadness, and without attaching too deeply into each particular event, just being with the sadness. So that felt profound, bringing awareness to it. But you had mentioned, Michael, in your talk about working with the habitual pattern, and I'm just wondering if you have any insights of what the work is, what is meant by working with it.
I think primarily in the context of this chapter, it's becoming aware of the way in which our habitual patterns might cut us off from the world, and recognizing that, and then letting go of that as best we can. Sometimes however we're feeling is fine. I mean, it can be a habitual pattern to want to change our feelings, and instead of just accepting, today I'm feeling sad, or I'm feeling whatever. And maybe that's all we need to do. There's nothing else that needs to be done. We just have our experience in the moment. But I think particularly in terms of what Trungpa Rinpoche was talking about in this chapter, what we're really looking for is what cuts us off. And that's not sadness. It's something else. It might be the stories we make up around that. If we make up some story about ourselves or some story about the world, that might be the habitual pattern we need to look at. But just the experiencing of an emotion, that's fine.
Well, that's interesting. Yeah, because that was my reaction to that sadness, was to pull in, to isolate, to push the world away.
Well, sometimes we need to do that too. But I think it's looking at it and doing what we need to do, or doing what we can do.
Yeah, and that is working with it.
I think I'd like to add that when we're caught in a habitual pattern, we hardly know it. It seems so right, what we're thinking. And yet it's not. It's just arbitrary. It's just a creation that we've developed over time. And in order to maintain that rightness, we have to sort of fall asleep into the thought. I'm speaking for myself here, that you'd hardly even notice that you're doing it, and there's certainly no sense of alternative. But I think that what we're doing here is, as we begin to shift our loyalty, as you might put it, from thoughts, which are habitual patterns, to awareness, we begin to realize that we can stop believing. First, you have to wake up and realize that you've been lost in this dream of whatever that pattern was. Because until that happens, you're just lost in it. One is. And then once that happens, then you can begin to realize it's just an arbitrary creation, and you can let it go. That there are no laws like that. They don't really work.
Thank you.
I feel like we're prisoners, I am, of beliefs that occur in our statements that occur in my mind from time to time. And as they occur, there's a quality of being a prisoner in it. But then you can wake up. Judy Journal.
Yeah, that idea that you're mentioning of feeling imprisoned by it really strikes a chord. Lately, I've been having some luck with recognizing that suffering is from wishing things were different than they are, and catching that and feeling the jolt as kind of a recognition, as a kind of freedom from accepting it and going into what is truly the suffering, and just being free from it in a few seconds, which is kind of revolutionary. You know, don't have to go there. Don't have to. It really is delightful when it occurs more and more. Very, very pleasurable.
Thank you.
Mm. No. Yeah. Um,
You're muted, John.
I'm sorry. I said I was thinking that it's worth contemplating the extent to which we are our own prisoners, lost and imprisoned by our thinking, and that we can wake up from that.
yes.
But it was just an arbitrary creation, that dream, that thought.
Mm-hmm.
That habitual pattern And those dreams, those imprisonments usually are very habitual, very sort of characteristic of a particular neurosis that we carry around for a while.
Mm.
Laura.
Yeah, that's making me think about how the six realms are sometimes described as styles of imprisonment.
Mm.
And being aware of my habitual thoughts when they're looking like the hell realm, or a hungry ghost, or you were saying tonight, though, particularly the animal realm being associated with habitual habits.
Yeah.
Would you agree? Yeah, go ahead,
Well,
Michael.
just that whole idea of Tudro, of really limiting our vision, limiting our perspective, shutting ourselves down,
Mm.
and just living in a familiar, habitual world is, kind of an animal realm type of existence. And I think that's, at least in this chapter, largely what he was talking about. He does say it can even become subhuman, sub-animal, so we can't. They're also below the animal realm. We can always go further if we want to really pursue that direction. It's not recommended at all.
That's why it's so important to have good head and shoulders. Animals walk hunched over, on four legs. Human beings, to be a human, is upright. Good head and shoulders. I used to talk about that all the time.
But sometimes I think we just see people like that, who are just really, they don't look around at the world around them. They're just, and they really, it looks like a really haggard, beaten down kind of existence. But you have tremendous sympathy for those people. But sometimes we encounter people who really seem to have narrowed their world down in that way, because they're overwhelmed or, whatever they've experienced. It's,
And the habitual, repetitive quality of our neuroses, so much so that we hardly even notice it because it becomes natural, a part of us. We accept it as being the proper understanding of who we are and what the world is. And we repeat it over and over again.
And I think that's why recognition of basic goodness, recognition of it, it's so important. Actually, Philip, since you mentioned The Wizard of Oz, I think that's part of the beauty of that movie, is that by the time they meet the wizard and find out that he's not this magical being, but what he does do is he helps the Scarecrow, the Lion, and the Tin Man realize they did have a heart all along, and they did have a brain all along, and they, in spite of being terrified, did show courage or fearlessness. I think that's why in art it's really showing how, regardless of how we feel about ourselves, we actually have these qualities. We just don't recognize them.
Mm.
I've been thinking about something that I'm just going to throw out, that we might do something together as a group besides study the Dharma. I don't know what it is, but maybe something of benefit to others that we could do collectively in some way. And I just throw the notion out for your consideration, and thought that it might be a lot of fun and really help the path, as well, help our progress on the path. We could think of something. So I'm just opening up the possibility, conversation. George, you're nodding. So, oh, you're muted, George.
I mean, there's no end of the natural disasters that are affecting people just in this country and Eastern Kentucky at the moment and elsewhere. And And then in Ukraine, there's the Warsaw Sangha, or that's working, I think, very hard and effectively to ease the suffering of Ukrainians who were still in Ukraine and have been damaged by the war around them. So I'd love to, if we could come up with something. It sounds like a great idea.
Laura, is that the link to the Ukraine meetings?
Yes, it is. They're having a meeting tomorrow,
9 a.m.,
1 p.m. our time.
1 p.m. your time, yeah.
Oh, Eastern Daylight Time. Yeah.
1 p.m. Eastern time?
Yeah.
Yeah.
7 p.m. their time, Eastern Central.
You can go to these meetings.
How do you go?
There's a link that Laura just put in chat. It's for a Zoom room. And you can just go. It's just, it's nice. They've been doing this for some months now.
And Jacek, or someone involved in that Sangha, makes available links for donations. So that's available.
Yeah. There was even talk at one point of people in this country opening their homes to refugees, but it's not so practical because most of the people coming out of Ukraine really don't want to go much further than Poland. I think there's some people going to Israel, though, as well. I've heard. That would be really interesting if we could come up with a project that we could do together. Oh, look at that. Can I read this, Val? Is that okay? Valerie texted me that Ian, who comes to our morning meditations, the Irishman who lives in Portugal a lot of the time and England, and Ian opened his home in Ireland and has people staying there. How about that? Well, any more comments or questions? Deirdre.
I feel I have a neuroses going on to do with generosity, that I feel like things are so unstable. And I just lost quite a bit of money in the stock market. And I find that I'm really holding back being generous because I feel like getting older and older that I don't know how much money I'm going to need in my further old age. And so it's got me really like narrowed down to just being focused on my own well-being. And that seems like a smart thing to do the way things are right now. But it also feels completely wrong to me, and that it's a sign of lack of trust. I'm just kind of confessing because I find if I do say the truth about what's going on in my neurotic mindsets and patterns, that it helps me actually get over them too, to talk about it. And I think I'm too concerned with my own security when other people have lost everything. So thank you for listening.
Thank you.
First of all, I think it was generous to share that. And I'm sure you're not the only person who feels that way. I know I have my moments of feeling exactly the same thing. And we just work with, we work with things as best we can. And
I love the idea of doing something as a group. I love this group, I have to say. And that will help. That will help me get moving in the Eastern Sun direction with this. So I like this idea a lot. Thank you.
Miriam?
Yeah, I have to concur. I like the idea. I'm also overwhelmed with, current predictions around this global famine where 150 million people are going to be affected, and a pandemic that's going to go rampant in the midst of this because people are vulnerable, migration. Like, this is so big, right? And I'm thinking how to help. And I don't know, it's like finding the action that has an impact which is meaningful enough. And my first instinct is to start a garden and send food, but I mean, that's not realistic either. But I'm just kind of, I guess thinking hard about what that project could be.
Mhm. Global famine.
I always remember the corny story years ago about a couple of people. You remember all the what was it? The crabs were dying on the coast of Australia, and they were coming up and dying on the ocean, on the shore. And two people are walking along the shore, and one of them bends down and throws a crab back into the sea. And the person says, "What are you doing? You can't save all these crabs. You can't do that." And the person says, "Yeah, but I can help that one." It's an old cornball story. Well, maybe we should end. We've got discussion group tomorrow night, and it's now 7 p.m. So shall I put the chants up? Michael, do you want to lead it?
Sure.
Okay.
So we'll close with a prayer for peace, and by dedicating the merit generated by our practice and our study and our discussion for the benefit of all sentient beings. By the blessings of enlightened and compassionate ones, by the power of my positive actions of 3 times and my prayers of pure aspiration, may wars, conflicts, epidemics, and all other maladies dissolve in this world, and may the earth and all who live on this earth enjoy the abundance of well-being. May all learn to live lovingly with each other. By this merit, may all obtain omniscience. May it defeat the enemy wrongdoing. From the stormy waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death, from the ocean of samsara, may I free all beings. By the confidence of the golden sun of the great East, may the lotus garden of the Rigdon's wisdom bloom. May the dark ignorance of sentient beings be dispelled. May all beings enjoy profound, brilliant glory.
Thanks, everybody.
Everyone.
Thank you, Michael, John.
Wonderful discussion.
Thank you, Michael, John, everybody. Good night.
Good
Thank
night.
you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Deirdre.
Thank you.
Thanks so much.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Good night.
Good night.
Good night, everyone.
Night,
Bye.
dear people.
Right.
See you tomorrow.
Okay.